My name is Alyssa. I am the new Administrative and Visitor Engagement Coordinator here at the Seward House. And today I'm going to be talking about two topics very near and dear to my heart, Fanny Seward and the theater. And my presentation today is called When I Was Your Age, Television Was Called Theater, Fanny Seward and Her Love of Theater. So we're going to start off today with a little bit of background on theater in the 19th century as a whole, what Fanny would have experienced while she was going to see plays. During this time, the melodrama was popularized, and melodrama deals with sensational and romantic topics that appeal to the emotions of the audience. And it involves mostly very heavily stereotyped characters, almost no character development whatsoever throughout the plot of the entire show. And it featured 6 basic characters, once again with almost no character development, and would often involve sensational plots, which involved love and murder. And just some examples of melodrama that I found some Fanny would have known and some she wouldn't have. We have Pygmalion, the TV show Grey's Anatomy, the book series A Series of Unfortunate Events by Lemony Snicket, and Sweeney Todd, the original one, which was published in the Penny Dreadful Chronicles, which ended up becoming my favorite musical. And during this time, theater itself was a source of popular entertainment, since our modern forms of entertainment weren't invented yet, like the television, computer, phones, all that kind of stuff. And it was also used as a means of escape. And Abraham Lincoln was even known to escape to the theater while he was president. And theater before the Civil War in the United States and after the Civil War was significantly different. After the Civil War, they put on more lighthearted productions, more comedies, more minstrel shows, to what I think they tried to kind of help lighten the mood a little bit and try to heal a little bit of the trauma that the country had just gone through. And I just listed some famous playwrights from the 19th century, Alexander Dumas, Jules Verne, Oscar Wilde, and Victor Hugo. So we're going to start off with who was Fanny Seward? For those of you who don't know, Fanny was born December 9th, 1844 to William and Frances Seward. She was named Frances Adeline after her mother and ended up going by Fanny, which was her mother's childhood nickname, so they didn't get the two confused. She's also my favorite Seward, so we're going to have a lot of bias in here. She was the youngest of 5. She was the only daughter that the Sewards had to survive past infancy. And she definitely took after her mother in personality. She was very shy. She was studious. She was a homebody. She was by no means as outgoing as her father was, even though she was daddy's girl through and through. She was a strange young woman for her time, even though, now she wouldn't be all that uncommon. She wanted to pursue a career was her main thing. Fanny wanted to be a writer, which was absolutely amazing. And she was fully supported with that. Her parents gave her a diary for Christmas when she was young to further support her with that. And she wrote down literally everything in her diary. And here is one of her diaries, a picture of one of her diaries. She recorded almost daily for years in this diary. Even the littlest of things, we have diary entries where it's just one line that says, went to church, or, went and saw Auntie Warden, something like that. She would write down the daily events, trips to Washington when her father came home, trips to the theater. Her diary is a spectacular and unique look into the mind and feelings of a young woman in the 19th century. And it's just so remarkable to read this diary and know that this is her. This is exactly what she was thinking. This is exactly what she was feeling. And she was also able to give us through this diary a very unique perspective of the Civil War. She had 3 very unique perspectives on the war. First of all, she was the daughter of the Secretary of State. So she was able to give us a little bit of a more political view of everything. She was the sister of 2 soldiers. Her oldest brother, Augustus, and her brother, William, were both soldiers. So she was also able to relate to many women during this time because of that. And we got her perspective on that as well. And we also received a civilian's perspective from Fanny, a woman civilian specifically, and how she was able to help the wounded in any way that she could, visit camps, all that kind of stuff. So it's amazing to just see. And something very important that she wrote about in her diary is her paper theater set. This is a close-up picture of the theater set. It was a German theater set that she received in Christmas of 1858 as a gift. And she wrote in her diary on that day, "I saw on a chair beside the chimney piece, where hung my stocking, a large white box with a beautiful picture on top. On opening it, I found the most beautiful little theater of paper. I knew at once it was from my dearest mother and was delighted with it. How kind and thoughtful! In the top of my stocking was a paper box in imitation of oak, filled with paper actors for, as it was announced, the Mignon Theater." But unfortunately, that actor box did not remain in pristine condition for long. For on January 2nd, Fanny wrote in her diary that her dog Belle chewed on the corner of the box that the actors are stored in. And if you come visit the museum when we reopen, you will be able to see that box. You can still see the puppy chew marks on it. And Fanny wrote in her diary about that. "Last night, Belle tore a part of the corner of the box in which the figures for my theater set came, but he did it so innocently that I did not punish him at all." So this theater set overall was one of Fanny's favorite toys. It was very, very important for her, especially when it came to her developing her career and her potential as a career for a writer. She would use this theater set to perform plays that she would write. She would perform them not only for her family, but visitors to the home and also her friends. She would show this theater set to many people who came through the home and would often ask them to perform their own little original plays on it. And when they did, she wrote down the plays that they would perform, who performed them, and a basic little plot summary of it, which I thought was cute. And on Tuesday, April 5th of 1859, she performed a play that she wrote called All's Well That Ends Well, using this theater set for her friend Sarah Howe. The theater was also very important for Fanny because it brought her family together in a way that it would not have been able to given the circumstances that they were in. She wrote many times in her diary about how much she loved going to the theater with her family and how often she would go with her family. Unfortunately, it wasn't an entire family outing where all of them would go at the same time, but she would go with her brothers, her sister-in-laws, or her father. She would often go see Shakespeare plays and comedies, and afterward would give a synopsis of the play that she saw and a very in-depth analysis of what she liked about it, what she didn't like, critiques for the actors, which I'm sure the actors never saw. But once again, good for her if she wanted to be a writer, especially if she wanted to write plays, for her to think critically about what she was seeing and the writing and all that kind of stuff. While she was in Washington, her main theater companions were her sister-in-law, Anna. That was her main theater companion, and also her brother, Will. Anna was married to her older brother, Fred, who was 14 years older than Fanny, so that's a pretty substantial age gap. But Fred was Mr. Seward's Assistant Secretary of State, and Anna was his official hostess. So whenever Fanny was down, they were the two that she saw the most. And so her and Anna would go to the theater, and whenever Will was not serving in the Civil War himself, he wasn't off with his own family or off with his regiment, he would go see plays with Fanny as well. Will and Fanny were the closest in age. There was only a 6-year age gap between the two of them, so he was definitely the brother that she was the closest with. So it's always nice for her to get together with her brothers and her sister-in-law to be able to experience these bonding experiences with them. And it was definitely a way for her to bond with Fred in a way that she didn't get when they were growing up, well, her specifically, because of that 14-year age gap. they didn't have the typical sibling experiences that you would have because of that age gap. So it was a way for her to get to know her brother and spend time with him. And not only did the theater, bring her family closer together, but it also brought some amazing people into her life. And one of them was Charlotte Cushman. Charlotte Cushman was a close family friend of the Seward family, and the older Fanny got, the closer the two of them got. They would correspond all the time, and whenever Cushman was physically with them, Fanny was almost attached to her hip. She was a role model for Fanny in many, many ways. She was able to show Fanny what a strong, independent woman was like, and how to be loud and proud about who you were. Fanny, of course, had so many amazing role models in her family, female role models in her family already, but she was still a very shy person, and shyness tended to run in the women in the Seward family. So Fanny was shown how to be loud and proud about who she was through Charlotte Cushman. Cushman would often stay with the family while she was in Washington, and from October 9th through the 14th of 1863, she did exactly that. And those days in her diary, in Fanny's diary, are completely filled with Charlotte Cushman and what they were doing together. And of course, being friends with the most well-known actress in the United States during this time definitely had its advantages. And on October 10th, Charlotte Cushman took Anna and Fanny on a tour of Ford's Theater, which was given by John Ford and his brother Harry. So that's pretty cool. It was definitely a unique experience that Fanny would not have got without knowing Charlotte Cushman. She described the theater in her diary as a very pretty theater, tasteful and convenient in its arrangements. She was shown all of the behind-the-scenes stuff of how a theater is run. She was shown backstage. Her and Anna were able to explore backstage. They saw call lists, they saw prop lists. They were even shown a green room, which confused Fanny, which I find this very amusing. She found out that the name of the room had absolutely nothing to do with the color. She wrote in her diary that she didn't see any green in the room. And she found out later that the green room was where actors would get ready before the performances and then take their makeup off and remove their costumes after the performance, which I just loved. I thought that was so funny. But her diary entries from the time that Cushman was there, like I said, was just entirely filled with her and Cushman, what they were doing, the time they were spending together. And Charlotte Cushman even allowed Fanny to sit in on a rehearsal of Macbeth that she was portraying the role of Lady Macbeth in, which is just, once again, a completely amazing and unique experience that I'm sure so many theater lovers would die to do. Charlotte Cushman was the most well-known actress. Macbeth is a very popular play by a very well-known writer. So I know I would have absolutely loved to sit in on that rehearsal and just see what was going on in that process. So Charlotte Cushman was not the only very, very famous actor that Fanny was introduced to through her family, through her love of the theater. Another major actor she met was Edwin Booth. So Edwin Booth was one of, if not the most famous actor in the United States during the mid-19th century. His father was Junius Brutus Booth, who was a very well-known actor throughout the world. And in the early 19th century, he came over to the United States from England. He told his wife that he was going on a tour of the United States for an unknown amount of time. Don't check on me, don't ask about me, just send me money. He actually wasn't going on a tour of the United States. He was coming over to live with his mistress. He and his mistress had 10 children, Edwin being one of them. He was very much taken under his father's wing at a young age. He was taken around the United States when his father actually did acting tours. But unfortunately, he ended up becoming his father's babysitter in a lot of cases, since his father did have quite the alcohol addiction, which Edwin did unfortunately develop the older he got, but thankfully he was able to overcome his alcohol addiction, unfortunately, unlike his father. But by the time he was 17, Edwin Booth was holding his own and performing on his own, and very quickly he became as famous, if not more famous, than his father. And on March 11th, 1864, before a performance of Hamlet, Edwin Booth came and dined at the Seward's home in Washington, where they were actually going to see afterward his performance of Hamlet. Fanny wrote in her diary about this night, "We have seen so much and so much worthy of admiration and esteem in Edwin Booth, the actor, that I am unwilling to leave it all to memory and unrecorded. I have been to see him 5 times." Fanny had seen him in Merchant of Venice, Don Cesar de Bazin, Richard III, and Hamlet. And like I mentioned, they were going later in the night to see Edwin Booth in the title role in Hamlet. She gives a long analysis of each of his performances that she's seen, what she liked, what she didn't like, how he was able to change his physique to actually be each of the characters. But she finally agrees that Booth is the most like Hamlet, stating that his eyes were the most like Hamlet's, saying they were so full of tenderness and sadness that one's heart aches at the sight, and Booth's eyes are Hamlet's eyes in their sad expression. She dedicated a lot more time to his physical description in her diary than just that, even though his eyes seemed to be her favorite feature of his. She described him as having dark, long, silky hair and magnificent dark eyes. There are those eyes again. His face is very thin and handsome, more from intellect than features, and he had a fine arched nose. So it was very clear that Fanny thought he was attractive, which I agree with. Seward ended up at dinner giving critiques to Edwin Booth about each of the performances that he had seen, even though Seward was by no means a theatrical expert. But according to Fanny, Booth took the critiques well, and definitely shows how comfortable Mr. Seward was with his dinner guests, especially ones as famous as Edwin Booth. Overall, Fanny definitely seemed to be in awe of Edwin Booth and what he was able to accomplish through his acting. Not only was he able to portray the characters, but he seemed to actually become them. He was able to change the expression in his eyes, the emotions in his eyes, to really bring these characters to life. It's one thing to read about these characters and see them on a piece of paper than it is to see them performed. And Edwin Booth was really able to just embody these characters and bring a humanity to them that I definitely think Fanny admired. Now, overall, how the theater impacted Fanny, it gave her some role models, Charlotte Cushman specifically, and through her own familial role models and Charlotte Cushman, she was able to see how strong women were able to be. You could be loud and you could be proud about who you were, and that was completely okay. It didn't matter what society wanted from you. This was something that Charlotte Cushman definitely embodied. It didn't matter what society wanted from you. If you were happy with who you were, that's all that mattered. And Charlotte Cushman was an excellent example of you don't need a man in your life to be happy or successful. And I think that may have possibly influenced Fanny's desire to not get married, maybe a little bit. It also gave her an opportunity to further bond with her brothers. Like I mentioned, there were some substantial age gaps between herself and her older brothers. There was an 18-year age gap between Fanny and her oldest brother, Augustus, a 14-year age gap between Fanny and Fred, like I mentioned, and a 6-year age gap between Fanny and Will. So being able to go to the theater gave her the ability to bond and spend time with her older brothers, and it also gave her that time with her father that she so desperately desired. Like I said earlier, Fanny was daddy's girl, 100%. She was called his shadow when she was younger because they were together so much. And unfortunately, due to her chronic health problems, she was ill like her mother. And Mr. Seward being in politics her whole life, literally her whole life, she didn't get to see him as much as she wanted to. But when she did, going to the theater was a way for her to spend that time with her father and have them have an escape from everything that was going on around them, all of the terror of the Civil War, because everything was so simple when you went to the theater. You went to see a play, especially these melodramas. The good guy wins, the bad guy loses, and of course the good guy always ends up with the girl. And at this time, they were unsure as to if that would happen. So having this escape was definitely useful for the Seward family, very, very helpful for the Seward family. And going to the theater also helped influence Fanny's desire to become a writer. She not only did she write books, she completed her first novel at age 19, which I think is very impressive. I am turning 23 in 2 weeks, and I have yet to do that, so I'm very impressed with that. But she also wanted to write plays as well. And because of the relationship that she had with Charlotte Cushman, it's not that far out there to, to think that she may have asked some advice from Cushman on, writing, or, can you give me some critiques on what I'm writing here? And of course, she had those shorter plays that she would perform for her family. And of course, her family's response would encourage her to keep going. And I'm sure Cushman was also encouraging her to continue to write, to continue to do what she loved. So overall, the theater had a huge impact on Fanny. She was part of the person that she grew into because of her love of the theater and all the people that it brought into her life. So that is my presentation. Thank you all for watching,